So
Awesome.
at the begin, maybe you can introduce yourself and tell what is your experience in building Web3 protocols projects.
Sure. So I'm Land Walker. I'm the co-founder of LandX. Um, so I started in the DeFi space a while ago. Actually, first project I built was an exercise system that was rewarding people who exercise with the tokens. So the first, I guess, move to earn project I had built was in 2015, a while ago. And then I went a little bit quiet with the development and did a bit of investing. And uh, about 2 years ago, through my affiliation with some landowners and through understanding what their problems are and what their, I guess, aspirations as as owners of the farmlands around the world and in Europe in particular are, we spoke a lot about how the Web3 can bring value to and solve some of the problems that they're facing. And a project was born, LandX, that initially had a slightly different shape. So we started off thinking that we would build a basically open sea equivalent, but instead of NFT monkeys, we'd be trading farmland NFTs. Because understanding that there is no global market for farmlands and there might be a global demand, especially in a situation with the world economy that we're experiencing now, um, with all the macro, pointing to the food security as a very important aspect of um, of our economic times, hyperinflation, growing energy prices that then lead to growing sort of commodity prices all over, including the farmland commodities and food, as probably all of you have experienced over the last year, have skyrocketed after COVID, and especially with with the war in Europe that goes on now, etc. So there's a lot of things that are pointing to the commodities being extremely important as an asset class, but there isn't really a mechanism to expose your portfolios or to capitalize on that growth of the commodities and importance of the commodities within the investment pyramids. So over, I guess, the last year and a half, a little bit less, probably about 15 months, we've pivoted that NFT project, and we've taken out the most essential element of it is is what basically LandX platform is now. And I'm sure we can go into that a little bit in more detail. But that's basically the story of LandX. We're a team of about 25 people now, I would imagine, that is sort of pretty much distributed between the developers, and then we have the real world guys that are dealing with farmers, dealing with the validation of lands. We have a back office that's processing legal work, and obviously finance, admin, accounting, legal, and all that sort of stuff, and also marketing and business development. And I guess my role in the project is to coordinate all that, and I guess bring the vision of LandX and push it forward to kind of, I guess, create a niche for ourselves in this global market. The products that we offer, they don't really exist anywhere outside of our LandX ecosystem, but I think they're absolutely phenomenally important and interesting as well. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that would look at these products and really see the global meaning behind them. So so probably a little bit later in this session, we will go sort of dive a little bit deeper into the details. But yeah, that's in a few words about who we are.
Sure, sure, thanks. So maybe the next question is gonna be also that simple and basic. So can you walk us through the project, through this how project works, and what are
Yeah,
you gonna do there with all these
sure,
tokens and farmers validators? Yeah.
sure. So the idea behind the project is to provide financing to real world farmers. It's a big problem with probably 80% of the global farmland um, sort of ecosystem and economy where the farmers don't really get access or ready access to the financing. So just to take a step back, why farmland and why that farmland is tremendously important. So the surface of our planet is about 30% of land, right? So about 70% of that 30%, which is, and just open my calculator, so 0.3 times 0.7, so that's about 20%. So 20% of the surface of the Earth is habitable land. So half of that, which is about 10% of the surface of our planet, is agriculture, right? Now, only 23% of those 10%, so that would be roughly 10 times 0.23, so roughly 2.3% of the surface of our planet is the farmland which is suitable for the production of crops. And the crops make up 83% of the global calorie supplies. If you think about it, so we've got 2.3% of the surface of our planet is capable of producing 83% of the calorie supplies. And our population grows at the same time. So we have now, 7.8 billion, and it's going to be 9 billion, 12 billion people. And we're not going to get any more of this farmland, so we're still going to be at the same level of 2.3% of our surface of our planet will be suitable for production of these crops. And that is, I guess, the fundamental thing about it, that 80% of people who are producing crops cannot access finance, cannot improve their production facilities, cannot get better equipment, cannot get fertilizers that they need because they don't have access to finance. So with the population growing and with the supply of the farmland limited on the same level, there's not going to be more farmland. You need to chop down Amazon forests, obviously, to do that. No one's going to let you do that. That's a bad idea. So you need to create, better yields. And the better yields from these farmlands come from the better technologies, better use of crop rotation, various other mechanisms of enhancement of yield production that is not available without access to finance. So liquidity and finance for these farmlands are a matter not just important for these farmers, but that's one of the most important global survival issues. Because if we don't have enough food, and all the research is now pointing to the fact that by 2030 we're going to have massive shortages of food that will affect a large number of people around the world, predominantly in the poorer countries, which is not a good thing at all. So by 2050 we need to double our yields from what we're producing now. So basically we need to double our production in order to cater for the calorie demands in 30 years. So it's crazy. So having all these problems, we see a solution where the money flows into the farmland will be unobstructed, decentralized, and available for everybody. And this is a fundamental principle of LandX. Anybody can invest in any farmland. So our platform works using existing legal rails. And that's one of the important things to understand, that when a lot of real world assets, and LandX is part of the real world asset project because we solve real world problems. We use blockchain as a technology to solve real world problems. So these projects rely on, or they try to build new legal frameworks. For example, if you want to own an apartment in Florida, and you buy an NFT, your NFT doesn't mean that you own that apartment. You still need to go and register that apartment. So that NFT is not meaningless. So there's a lot of use cases that are being built now that are not using the existing legal frameworks. Therefore, they are just just basically pilot projects for the future. That's how life might be looking like in the future. LandX is using existing legal rails. So we use existing form of a contractual obligation where a farmer promises LandX to pay part of their future harvest, which is fixed amount of future harvest, in exchange for an NFT token. So let me unpack that. So there's a farmer who has a block of land and he grows, for example, wheat. That wheat that he grows, let's say he grows 4 tons of wheat per hectare, and he's got, let's say, 10 hectares of farmland for easy calculation. So he grows 40 tons of wheat every year. And he needs financing. So he comes to LandX, and LandX offers him a calculation. It says, we will allow you to tokenize up to, so he had 4 tons, 10 hectares, 40 tons. We say 10% of the 40 tons, which is 4 tons. So we will allow you to tokenize 4,000 kilograms, which will mean that every year you will have to pay 4,000 kilograms of wheat to the platform, which will then pay that amount to the investors. In exchange, we will give you an NFT token that will basically stipulate this arrangement that you have 10 hectares of land, you're promising to pay 400 kilograms per hectare. Altogether, you're promising to pay 4 tons of wheat per year. That's your NFT. What does he do with that NFT? He can deposit that NFT into a smart contract that will break it down into 4,000 X-Wheat tokens. And each X-Wheat token, when you stake it, pays you 1 C token a year. 1 C token is a kilogram of wheat. So if you stake all 4,000 X-Wheat tokens, over a year you will accumulate 4,000 C wheats. So C wheat is 1 kilogram. That's exactly how much the obligation of a farmer was to pay his annual crop share. So what does a farmer do with these 4,000 X tokens that he now has? Well, he sells them to investors, and this is where the liquidity comes in. So by having these 4,000 X tokens, the farmer now can sell these X tokens to the investors using our platform, liquidity pools that we said, an OTC desk that we have, or an XUSD stable coin that we also have. That's another pathway. So he's got a way to sell these X tokens to the investors and receive money up front. Now he has the money up front that he can use to expand his business, build irrigation system, buy a new tractor, or whatever he needs this money for, he can now put it into the productive use. His obligation to pay part of these future harvests remains for as long as he has this NFT locked up. At any time, he can go to the market, buy back the X tokens. So he had 4,000 X tokens. So now he needs to go buy back the 4,000 X tokens. Let's say he built the irrigation system. His productivity went up. He saved sufficient amount of money to buy back the 4,000 X tokens. He buys back the X tokens. He deposits them into the smart contract. He gets back his NFT. He doesn't owe anything to anybody. So that's in a nutshell how the platform works. Of course, there are some layers, added layers of security for investors and et cetera, also security for the platform to make sure that it's a particular type of land and it's a particular type of legal obligation, etc. But in a nutshell, that's the mechanics of how the platform works.
Okay, that's great. Now I'm just gonna start with some random question about your project, because I went to read your white paper and there was a lot of things, a lot of sometimes very difficult things, and I wanna explain it a little bit
Absolutely.
more. Firstly, maybe we can start with this situation when, for example, there is no harvest from the farmer side, and how you secure investors.
Okay. So the farmlands that we take on board, they need to meet certain criteria. So first, they need to be a validated 5-year production history on that farmland. of sufficient level. So it needs to be at least on the average for the region. So it needs to be quality farmland. That's one. The second part is that if there is a weather or climatic event that is limiting the production, the harvest, the crop share part of the harvest is insured by crop insurance. So the investors are protected, and the obligation that the farmer has is limited to approximately 10% of his harvest. That's what we call maximum allowable crop share. So we do not allow the farmer to tokenize more than 10-12% of his annual average harvest. That way, even if he has a bad harvest, he can still pay that obligation to the platform and to the investors. And also, there's a lien over the land. So if he doesn't pay, then administratively, the platform can reclaim that land from him and then pass this land to the farmer who will meet that obligation of crop share payments. So basically, there's a three-tier security mechanism for investors. One is a crop insurance, two is a security over the land, and three, there's a 12 months deposit. So farmer always has his crop share obligation prepaid on a platform in advance. That way, the investors have a clear visibility of how much prepaid obligation there is inside the protocol that ensures that they're collecting the yield when they're staking the X tokens.
Okay, so there is some levels of security to make investors happy. Are you gonna onboard farmers from all over the world, all over the Europe, and how are you gonna meet all the laws that are different in every country?
Right. So it's a good question. So we at the moment have our investors from Europe, and they have a significant holdings of the farmlands that have been already committed to the platform. It's about 50,000 hectares, or about $300 million worth of farmland assets at very conservative valuations that we can start, bringing into the platform and tokenizing the crop share from these lands. But we're also doing outreaches and building the validator networks around the world. And I think geographical diversification is one of the most important features of LandX, where investors are not exposed to any particular region or any particular country or any particular farm. So they are exposed to the general ecosystem of LandX, which is basically at the moment comprises of four major crops. So we have corn, wheat, rice, and soy. So these four crops are the crops that we can tokenize. We don't work at the moment with gardens, with olive, with fruits, with vegetables. We don't have the capacity to process that, but we do work with these four crops, and these four crops, they constitute more than half of the calorie supply that we spoke about earlier. So it's very important. These crops are the most important staple crops in the calorie baskets around the world.
How many people is in your team building this project?
So we're about 25 people, which are spread between the dev team, then the agro team, which is working with farmers. We've got legal, we've got marketing, biz dev, and we've got admin. So roughly 25.
Okay. Can you tell us something about those validators? Because there's going to be investors, farmers, and between them there's going to be validators. So there is in the white paper that you need to stake tokens to become validator. So tell me, how many tokens do you need to stake, and how does it work exactly to be validator?
Okay, so the vision of LandX is to decentralize this whole mechanics completely, where the decisions will be made by the DAO and by the holders of LandX tokens in the future that will onboard the validators. The validators are the middlemen between the platform and the farmer. So their job is to identify suitable farmlands, onboard the farmer, produce the verification of the farmland ownership, produce the economic verification of the farmland productivity, ensure that the farmers are paying their annual crop shares on time and are not falling behind. So basically provide quality farmlands to the platform. For that, they're rewarded in terms of a commission from the initial payments that the farmer is getting when he is tokenizing his obligation, as well as a recurring fee that is a commission that is paid to the validators whenever the farmer pays his crop share on time. So being a validator is a very lucrative business, or can be potentially a very lucrative business if a validator does a good job. So his ability to expand his operation will be connected to the amount of LandX tokens that he will need to stake to make sure that his risk profile is not skewed towards an area where he might try to, provide a land that has no value. However, there's a very transparent way to validate whether the farmland exists and whether the farmland is of good quality. So we use geospatial imagery analysis. It's called NDVI index, and NDVI index is an index of vegetation that is being produced on a particular block of land. So you can see a chart, literally. So it's a system where you put the coordinates of your farmland, and then it will produce a chart of when and at which periods there was high levels of vegetation on that land. So if you see a pattern that is representative of the planting and harvesting of crops in that region, and you see that over the past 5 years, and you see a high level of this index, let's say 0.8, 0.7, that means that there's a high level of vegetation which has been planted and harvested at the times when the other surrounding fields have also been harvested. So you have a pretty good assurance that this is not a swamp, it's not a piece of land for cattle, it's not a forest. So you have a very good understanding that that's a productive agricultural field. So then that limits the ability of the validator to play funny with the protocol. So the amount of tokens that he is staking dependent on the quota that he has. And I think these parameters would be probably later on refined, but they should be in the vicinity of about 20% of his risk exposure that he brings to the platform have to be covered by him. That's at least what we think where that number should be. But it may be higher, maybe lower, but at some point I think the DAO will be able to vote for that. At the moment, before we sort of go through the process and we start establishing the protocol, all the validators that we have are our own internal validators, as well as the validators that we're bringing in from other countries using various different models. We've got an NGO in Philippines that we're working with that are looking to act not only as a validator of the farmlands, but also as a manager of the finances for these farmers, because farmers do not have sufficient economic and financial sort of expertise to manage the finances appropriately. So this NGO would sort of take on responsibility to do that on behalf of the farmers. That's a very interesting project. In Kenya, we're also starting the conversations with the project that is looking at sustainable agricultural ecosystems, and I think what they have is tremendously interesting. And for us as well, partnering with them allows us to very quickly have our people that will be looking at onboarding the farmers in places like Kenya or Zimbabwe or Mali. So I think the sort of geographical spread and ability to use existing legal infrastructure emphasize that. So we use existing legal rails. The obligation of a farmer to pay a crop share in exchange for something of value is a traditional and very normal civil contract that is easily implementable anywhere in the world without too much of a complication. So that, I guess, is one of the main things that we're doing. We're not relying on future legal um, mechanisms to be developed. We use existing framework of legal contracts that have been, in existence for many decades.
So how you guys are making money on that, on this process?
Yeah, so LandX governance token, the LandX governance token, is a limited amount governance token that is staked by the investors into the protocol. So this token gives the biggest exposure to the LandX platform. LandX platform takes a commission from the funds that are extended to the farmers. That's one commission, and the second is the commission that it takes from the investors that are basically converting their C tokens into cash. So when the investor receives the C token and then he claims the C tokens for the USDC and the treasury, then there's a tax paid, which also goes to LandX. Now, LandX distributes the commission three ways. 60% of the commission that LandX platform generates go to the stakers of the LandX token. 35% go to the LandX operations, and 5% go to LandX Choice, which is basically a fund which is built to develop sustainable farming practices and shared knowledge pools and disseminate the best practices to make sure that the farmers are not just, using the money, to buy houses and holidays, but they are, using money productively to move them away from, from a non-sustainable farming practices or from ecologically harmful farming practices, etc. So that fund will be deployed through grants that it will give to certain regions and certain farms in particular.
All right. So there is also another question from the chat. So what arguments do you use discussing with farmers that you are a credible company worth to cooperate with?
Well, for a farmer, I guess it's not. So for a farmer who doesn't have access to the finance at the moment, I guess the main argument is that we're able to finance his farm. So, beggars are not choosers, and the farmers around the world are in a situation where they cannot get access to the finance. So, it's not a difficult proposition when you're offering people money. I guess the more difficult part is to make sure that the farmers understand their exposure, that they understand that they have a perpetual obligation to pay part of the future harvest. Here, it's very important that the validator does a good job, and also that there is a bunch of explanatory materials that the farmer understands that what he is committing to is a perpetual obligation unless he closes down his obligation by buying back these X tokens off the market. And of course, there's a learning curve, because for investors and for farmers that do not have crypto wallets, and this is 99% of them, that they don't really know what the blockchain is and how that works. The role of a validator becomes very important, because all that work to sort of onboard the farmer, to get the X tokens, to sell them, etc., that falls onto the LandX and the validator working for the farmer and in farmer's interest.
Yeah. All right. So the next question is, you said that you are gonna have their stablecoin XUSD. So right. How it is gonna work? Is it gonna be backed by those commodities?
Yes. So the purpose of the stablecoin, the purpose of the XUSD, is to give investors that do not understand the commodity market a product that has less volatility, but also exposes them to the crop share yields that is being generated by this crop share obligation of the farmers. So how we do that is through a limited XUSD product. So it's not a product that will be widely and openly available, but it's only minted whenever there's a large farmer who wants to onboard, who wants to get the financing, and he wants to get this financing quickly. So we open a tranche of XUSD. The investors would invest USDC. In exchange for the USDC, they get XUSD. The USDC that investors invested would go to the farmer, and the farmer, as a collateral for that obligation, will deposit the X tokens that they receive from the obligation that they have to pay the crop share. So the farmer has an obligation to pay crop share. He gets the NFT, sells NFT, gets X tokens, deposits these X tokens, and gets the USDC. But when he gets this USDC, there is a discount, right? So he is not getting the full amount because he's cashing out a large amount instantaneously. So there's a discount of around 15% that he gets, but he needs the money now. So he gets that large amount of money, but that discount of 15% plus the yield that he's paying every year goes to the stakers of the XUSD that have provided USDC as a base currency for this mechanic. Does that make sense, or it's better to sort of draw it out on the chart or somehow?
It's kind of complicated.
Well, I mean, there's a white paper on the XUSD in our documents, and I think it unpacks it. But it's a pretty straightforward thing. So on one side you have, so it's a smart contract. On one side you have X tokens coming in, right? So let's say on the left side there's a farmer. He puts X tokens in, and he takes out USDC. On the right side, the investor puts in USDC, right? And he takes out XUSD. So then he stakes this XUSD, and he receives a discount that the farmer has received when he got the USDC, and as well as the yield that the farmer pays every year from his farm. So we anticipate the XUSD yields to be around 14 to 15%, but it comes with a slightly different management mechanic. So it's not like a stable coin where you have unlimited amount of withdrawals that you can make. There's no fixed holding periods, but there's a protocol level daily withdrawing limit. You cannot basically have a bank run on that stable coin. Yes, you can cash out, but you can cash out over time. And if you want to cash out, it will take you some time to get all of your USDC back. So we're not looking at that stable coin as the same way as any other stable coin, because we want to make sure that we don't encounter the death spiral that the UST had on Anchor, for example. Whenever the sentiment will change, people start running. We actually go further than that. We have a pause function in a smart contract where the DAO can vote to pause any payouts out of this smart contract. But what's good about our project is that we receive real yield from real world anyway. So we know that we will make investors whole. And the worst case scenario is that they will get their money back plus the interest that will be paid through the yield, through the farmland yield. And maybe they will not get their 15%, but they will get their money back, and they will get a smaller yield. So, and that's a pretty much feature. So, I mean, some people would say, well, that's not really a DeFi stablecoin. Yes, it's not. But we have all seen what happens with the self-driving stablecoins that have no mechanism to stop the bank runs. A lot of people suffer because of that. So we take a different approach, and we want to have a stable coin that has a driver who who drives the bus, and that's going to be the LandX DAO. It will have a vote to be able to drive that bus and to be able to to create incentives and to stop that from falling apart. And I think it's very, very important at this stage of the DeFi development that there's a stable coin that pays a high yield, but at the same time has these safety and security mechanisms that are built into the whole framework of the stable coin.
What's
But
the
yeah, but for more details and for really deep deep down of the working of the XUSD, there is a white paper on in the docs section, so you guys are most welcome to to jump on it and dissect. And we also have quite an active community on Discord where you can ask all sorts of questions. We have AMA sessions and things like that, so you're welcome to join in, and we'll be happy to see you there. In fact, we do have a certain amount of Omega roles that we offer to our partners. So Omega roles are our highest community role that once the token launch will be announced allows a higher potential allocation during the public round, which will be probably happening over the next several weeks. So
yes.
if your community is happy to join in, then we will have a certain allocation that we can discuss with you, and then you can tell your guys what it is and how it works.
Sure, that's great. But for the next question, why you separated tokens to X token and C tokens? Why it cannot be just the one token that gives exposure to commodities?
Right. So there's a big difference, and I think it's very fundamental to understand the difference between these two tokens. X token gives you the right to collect one C token every year. So it's like a bond, right? So it's like a vault that if you have it, so if you have an X token, you guarantee that you will receive a kilogram of wheat or rice or corn or soybeans every year from now on. That's why it's a vault. We call it a vault. C token is a commodity. So one C token equals in price to 1 kilogram of underlying commodity. So you can always exchange 5 C tokens for the value of 5 kilograms of whatever the commodity is. So let's say 1,000 X soy tokens will give you every year a payout of 1,000 kilograms of soy or 1,000 X soy tokens. When you collect that payout, you can always go with the C tokens and you can claim the C tokens for whatever the value of 1,000 kilograms of soybeans are. It will be approximately, now it would be approximately $500 US. So 1,000 C tokens will be about $500 US. But how much the X token is, market has to decide, because the C token price is formed at the global commodity markets. So we're pulling the data using Chainlink oracles that give us up-to-date pricing on the soy, rice, wheat, and corn, and that's a C token price. So the C token price is not determined by us; it's determined by, it's not determined by the LandX community or by supply and demand of the LandX products, but it's determined by the global markets of the commodities, whereby the X token price is determined by supply and demand of X token on our LandX ecosystem. So if there's more investors than there is offers of the X token, the price goes up. If there's more offers than investors, then the price goes down. So our interest, of course, as operators of the platform, to ensure that the X token price remains relatively stable. So we want to make sure that if there is demand for X token, that we will keep supplying the new farmlands to make sure that we don't drop the price too much by oversupplying the farmland, but at the same time, there is an ability to expand the whole ecosystem.
Okay, so to make it clear, so C tokens, there are gonna be price of it. It's gonna be the same as the commodity in the real world, but price of X token is gonna be. It's not like just 1 kilo the price, or it's gonna you can make a bigger supply and it's gonna drop.
Well, well, 1X token gives you 1 kilogram every year, right? So it pays you 1 kilogram of the commodity every year. So whatever the market will price that will be the price of X token. But there's a difference between 1 kilogram and 1 kilogram every year, right? There's a difference between I get $1 and I get $1 every year. So $1 I pay $1, but for $1 every year, I pay whatever I want to pay, given the fact that I need $1 every year. So I may pay $100. It means I get my money back in 100 years. Or I may pay $20, right? It means that I'll get my money back in 20 years. So, but after that, after 20 years, I still keep receiving $1, right? So I start into profit. So that is where the investors will have to price that. We will have an article coming out about some of the methodologies of how we think the X token might be priced. So if you follow us on Twitter, then it will be probably posted next week. And we're happy to have obviously a discussion in the community, because there's no such product out there in the market that is paying the yield in units of commodity every year. And the commodity, so one thing to understand is that the commodity yield that is being paid out to the stakers of X token is paid out in value of the commodities that are historically beating the inflation. So you're not getting your yield in dollars, you're getting your yield in kilograms of corn, soy, wheat, or rice. And that means that if corn, soy, wheat, or rice appreciating faster than the inflation, it means that your yield is appreciating faster than inflation. So your X token price has to reflect that unique feature, that yield that you're getting is also appreciating faster than inflation. Does that make sense?
Sure. But about this inflation, you said that this is good hedge for the inflation commodities, and I think that's right. When you've got really high inflation, but in the time when inflation is just steady, like it was like a few years ago when it was like 1-2%, it's not that good inflation hedge, because all the process, all the technology of production, all these commodities, it's getting better, so we can harvest a lot more on the same square meter of land. So in the process, in the future, it won't be as that good for the inflation hedge. It's just gonna be commodity.
I hear that. I mean, I hear that argument quite a lot, and there's very important thing to understand, that there is the land, and I'm not sure if you guys or any one of you has been exposed to any farmland, production cycles, but there's one very important characteristic of the farmland, which is its biomass, that is, or percentage of the biomass that is inside that land. So the more fertilizers you use, the higher yields, or the higher amount of crops that you will generate, but you will be removing the biomass from the soil. So your soil will start becoming a desert. And at some point in time, you will, if you keep doing that, in some time, you will turn your productive soil into a desert, and then you will not be able to grow anything. So there's a limit of how much you can extract out of the soil without deteriorating its quality. And one of the biggest problems that we have now in Europe, for example, is that 50% of the farmlands are below the sustainability threshold of the biomass inside it. So the normal percentage is around 3%. The best lands in Europe at about 2% at the moment. Average is about 1.5%. So it's half the biomass that is needed for sustainable farming practices. So if we want to create more yield, and we use more fertilizers, yeah, probably we're going to get more yield, but we're going to kill the soil. If you have a look, there's a safe soil movement. It's very strong. There's an Indian guru who is driving around the world, on a motorcycle, tries to bring awareness to the issue. But it's a real problem that you cannot sustainably increase yields on existing lands without killing that land, and that makes perfect sense. So if you look at the at sort of um, uh, photosynthesis cycle, so the plant is taking the energy from the sun by collecting carbon. Then it will drive the carbon, from the leaves down its roots. And then when it goes to the roots into the soil, it gets broken down into simple sugars that are then absorbed by the microorganisms that live inside that soil, that are then producing enzymes and nutrients to feed that plant. And they travel up the roots, and that's how the plant is growing. So when you're putting fertilizer in the ground, you're killing that biomass, and you're replacing that logical process of converting the carbon from the air through photosynthesis into the sugars, and you're replacing that by fertilizer that the plant just eats up, and that's it. But the biomass dies out, and eventually you're going to end up having a desert. Big problem. So your argument that over time, when interest rates will go down, eventually it will not be interesting. I think it will be more interesting, because then what happens is that there will be more capital available to transition the farming from unsustainable farming practices to more ecologically and climate friendly farming practices. And that's what we need. We need higher yields, but we also need climate friendly farming. And that's where I think the big advantage of the decentralized model is that investors are able to expose themselves now without any limitation of the amount to the farmland derivative products. And I think LandX, through this unique model, is leading the way, certainly in this area of the farmland. But it's going to be probably the growth, and the massive growth will happen exactly when the interest rates will stop falling down. Because for investors, it will also be sorry. Oh, so yeah, so when interest rates will start falling down, I think we're going to see a whole bunch of new inflows that are coming into the platform, because the dynamics of supply and demand of crops and population will not change. So there will not be more farmland, and the population will grow, and people will need to eat more.
Okay, but
Right?
I think this is gonna happen. I think in many years ahead. It's not gonna be scenario for like next
I mean,
five
have a look.
years.
Have a look, and we do publish some interesting reports. By 2030, so in 8 years, you're going to have a very dramatic situation with food security. At the moment, there is about 62 million people um, just this year that 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 have not been able to feed because of the growing food prices. But that's a very conservative number by the IMF. There's going to be uh, probably, you know, go to Google Trends, and type in food security, and have a look at how food security trends as a topic on Google. And then you will see what happens with the food security narrative, because your X tokens is exposure to food security narrative, basically. That's what I think, how it's going to trade closely following the food security narrative. The moment our population solves the food security issue, and it will guarantee everybody food at affordable prices, yeah, of course, LandX will be an interesting mechanism which is complementary to the existing ones. Before that happens, this is a necessary diversification of assets in any investment portfolio. We strongly believe that X token has to sit next to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then you have to have X wheat or X basket inside.
Okay, sure. That's really interesting stuff. I will try to look at some reports and yeah, do some more research on this topic.
Right.
And you said about XBasket. Can you explain
Yeah.
what is this token and why
Yeah.
you're gonna release it?
Yeah, so XBasket is basically an index fund token. So we have four prime vaults. So X soy, X rice, X corn, and X wheat. XBasket is equal amounts of these together in one vault. But it also has a self-compounding feature. So when you're collecting yield in C tokens, the XBasket will sell that yield and it will buy more X baskets, right? So, I mean, it will buy more X tokens inside. So when you cash out your X basket, you will receive more X tokens over time. So that yield will be compounded into the X tokens. And it's just for, for people who don't want to actively manage the C tokens, it gives it, a slightly different exposure, a higher exposure to the X token price and a less exposure to the C token price.
Okay. Are you gonna bring some more commodities in the future to your platform?
There is no immediate need for that. We do have a pipeline of these four staple foods, these four staple commodities that we're focusing on at the moment. There are some interesting conversations about carbon credits, and probably we'll see what happens with the markets with carbon credits, but we need to make sure that there is a transparent price discovery on carbon credit markets, and there is a couple of issues there at the moment with the types of carbon credits. So it's not a very straightforward process, but it would be interesting, and I'd be keen to bring the carbon credits on the platform at some point. When it comes to the commodities like palm oil and rapeseed and some more exotic commodities like cocoa nuts, for example, or Arabica coffee. Probably that conversation will need to happen once we are very well underway with establishing a very strong mechanics and pipeline and really leadership in this area across these four first commodities before we start looking at bringing more stuff onto the platform. At least that's our vision at the moment. Our hands are full. We think that if we cover these four well, we're covering 80% of the market demand.
All right. So, in which countries is the company established a signed contract with farmers, and how many farmers is there cooperate with you?
We don't disclose the exact geographic locations of the farmers just to keep our competitive advantage in this field. But we do work in Europe. We are building the pipelines, and we have the commitments from farmers in Latin America. We have some initial views on the farmland coming from Southeast Asia, Australia, and Africa. Probably the first year of LandX would probably be predominantly lands from Europe. And then I think maybe towards mid of next year, we will have probably a third of the lands will come already from the places other than Europe. And we're staying away from the US. So we're not working in US or Canada. And well, at the moment at least. And then hopefully, by the same time next year, we will have probably, I'd say, a third of the lands coming from Europe, a third of the lands will come from Latin America, and a third of the lands will come from both Southeast Asia and Africa. But we will have, so all the information about the types of the lands in aggregate format, the number of fields, hectares, productivity, etc. That's all available on the platform, except for the data, which is the personally identifiable information of the farmers. So that's hashed. That's also available, but in the hashed formats and the metadata of the NFTs.
So there is many people in your team, 25, as you said, and I want to ask you about founding. Now you've got token private sale, and there's gonna be TGA in the future, so that will get you more money to just do your work. So what funding comes from now?
Yeah. So our funding, our initial funding comes from our seed investors who are farmland owners themselves. So they committed both farmlands to the platform and the initial funding. So the funding that we have remaining is about 4.3 million US dollars that is going into the liquidity pools for the X tokens. So when X tokens are minted against the committed farmland that we also have, we will have 5, significant, quite large liquidity pools ranging from $500,000 to $1 million US dollars in each in US dollars, and matched by the same amount of X tokens on the other side. So our seed investors are locked in with a cliff of 4 years. They have a significant allocation of our governance tokens, but they are locked in for 4 years. And the vesting period is another 4 years after the cliff. So they're there for a very long term. And we're raising now a private round, which is not very large. And the idea of this private round is to get some institutional investors that will help us to bridge the gap between the Web3 and the TradFi industries. Hopefully, we're working with investors that have the connections and have the ability to bring us to the funds, bring us to the sovereign wealth, bring us to the institutional investors that are looking at potentially the blockchain, and our project inside the blockchain would stand out because it's sort of dealing with the real world assets and farmland, and that's really something that is easier for them to understand than some sophisticated farming strategies, just purely based on some DeFi protocols. So after that, after the private round, we're going to have a small public round as well, and the main idea behind that is to build a community of people that are believing in the project long term, and also exposing themselves to the growth of the project, as well as giving them the voting opportunities to shape the direction, or to help shape the direction of where the project will be going into the future. So it's going to be a pretty small public round, followed by a pretty small private round, which will be, and I'm dropping some alpha here. We have on our community, we have alpha farmers. These are the people that are on the test net. They get airdropped some USDC and some test ETH. They can try out the platform. They can participate in our yield competition that we're making, and some of the allocations, and we will be able to give our partners and people who are giving us a voice and introducing us to their community, such as yourself, a certain number of Omega Farmer allocations. And Omega Farmers is our sort of highest echelon of the community that will have to perform certain community tasks by spreading the word about LandX, but they get a higher allocation of their LandX token during the public round. So there's going to be they're called Omega Farmers. So there's going to be an Omega Farmer round for about 3 days with some higher allocation. Then there's going to be Alpha Farmer round, and then it's going to be the public whitelist with the smallest allocation. And after that, there's probably going to be an LBP event. If we're not sold out by then we're going to have an LBP event on the balancer that has to sort of get the remaining of the tokens out there into the circulation without any limits or without any restrictions. So then that's where the investors can really sort of come in and ape in if there's anything left. But again, it's a pretty small, both public and a pretty small private round. So it's a pretty tightly held tokenomics model with the majority of the tokens being locked for 4 years, and that should give investors a lot of comfort in knowing and understanding there's a lot of money inside the protocol that's not going to leave the protocol for for the next 4 to 8 years. It's actually quite rare. I haven't actually seen models like that yet in any project. So I think especially in the current environment, that should give a lot of comfort to investors.
Yeah, for 4 years it's quite a good time, because mostly we see like a few months, maybe a year. So so there is like a situation when they drop their token on a community, and
yeah, that's right. So
it.
that's not. Yeah, that's the last thing that will happen in this project. So the community, and because it's not going to be a big community, also there's not going to be a lot of tokens and a lot of opportunities. So allocations are pretty small. So we're going to have, not a massive amount of people, but we hope that we're going to have the people that are there, that are sharing the vision of importance of the farmland, importance of this whole industry that we're trying to, liberalize and break the barriers and really open up. I mean, some of the things that are absolutely fascinating about this industry is that the same or equivalently productive farmland in one country, let's say in Colombia, for example, a piece of farmland, a hectare of farmland would cost, $1,500 US, for example, and it would produce 4 tons of rice. And a similar, production farmland in Philippines would cost, $10,000 US, so $15,000 US. And so these are very sort of unnatural things. And yes, there are certain sort of geopolitical risks and also social risks, etc. But that's not a 10 times difference, right? So that's maybe 15 to 20% price difference. It has to be. And you see the same in Europe. So farmland in Romania, for example, would be, let's say, $6,000 to $8,000 a hectare, and farmland in Poland would just not be available at all. So, farmland in so we're not working in Poland yet, that I can say. So, and we don't know much about the farmland market in Poland, but what we have learned is that there's going to be a very difficult market if we were to try to put LandX platform in Poland, because there's certain very strict limitations about farmland ownership, allocations, and limits on sizes, etc. that exists. So
yeah,
let's say Romania.
Our law is really difficult, so I think that's not gonna be easy job for you to come here and cooperate with someone.
So it's not. Yeah. So, but look, I mean, if there's a validator or there's anybody from a community that wants to have a crack and have a chat to us about that, we're always welcome to have a chat and see what can be done. We do believe that decentralized financing and decentralized models, they do work much better because they're more efficient. They bring better value to farmers, and the way we're doing it, I think, is has a double benefit, because the farmer itself has no exposure to the currency risk and no exposure to the commodity risk. He pays his obligation in units of commodity that it grows every year. So for him to understand what 300 kilograms of corn per hectare is very simple. He knows that he just owes 300 kilograms a hectare every year, and that's it. And if he wants to close that out, he goes and buys out his obligation. So I think it's a pretty flexible and certainly in areas where farmers do not have access to finance, and that's 80 to 90% of the farmers around the world. It's a very, very important financial instrument, I think, of the future.
So it's 1 hour. Do you have still a few minutes to talk with us, or you got some another meeting?
No, guys. Yeah. Go ahead if you have any questions. I've got the afternoon free, and
sure. So we got time till evening, till the evening.
Let me just have a very quick look at the calendar. So I do have a 5:30. Yeah, so I do have a 5:30. Oh no, sorry, 4 o'clock. Yeah, so I do have a 4 o'clock hard stop, but until then.
Sure, maybe.
And I'll probably need about
15
minutes to catch a breath between then. But now we've got easily 15-20 minutes. No worries.
Okay, so this is the new system how farmers can finance themselves. So what was the old one? What you compete against?
Okay, so what we're competing against is this. So you're a farmer. Let's say you're a farmer in, let's say, Bulgaria, right? So you go to the bank and you say, I want to build a storage facility for my grain, right? So I want to build a silo for my grain. You go, yeah, good. We'd like you to bring us 5 years of your bank statements and 5 years of your bookkeeping, because we want to know whether you have the ability to pay us back. He scratches his head and he goes back and he never goes back to the bank again. Why? Because he never declared. So 80% of the farmers that don't declare what they make, they sell their grain to the to the dealers, but they don't put it through the through the cash registry. So he can't show them the good books. If he shows them the books that he has, the bank will say, well, sorry, we can't give you a loan. So he goes back to the bank. He says, oh, actually, can I get a personal loan? And they go, sure, get a personal loan, no problem. Give us your land as a collateral, and you can get a personal loan of up to 15,000 euro. If your land is big enough, maybe 25,000 euro. And you'll pay 6 to 7% interest, and you get a personal loan, 5 years. That's what they have now. If you go to Brazil, it's worse, because you go to Brazil and you try to get, and this process in Bulgaria will probably take you 3 to 6 months. If you go to Brazil, the process will take you 6 to 9 months. It's all the same, but the only difference is that they'll give you a loan in Brazilian, in Brazilian reals, right? Not in pesos, reals, of course. And reals interest rate is a double digit. So it could be 11, 12, 13, 14%, whatever it is. And they will put a maximum loan duration of 5 years. So now you need to pay back the loan and the principal in 5 years that has a double digit interest rate, which is you have to generate that income out of the commodities that you're growing, that you're selling, not for pesos, not for reals, sorry, but you're selling them at the prices of the US dollars, because that's what the commodities are traded at. So as a farmer, you're exposed to the commodity price risk. Let's say you're growing soybeans, and in that period of time, the soybeans go down in price. Bang. You're certainly receiving less US dollars for your soybeans. And let's say at the same time, the Brazilian real goes up. I mean, it's a forex market. I mean, you're not hedging against it. Anything can happen. Real goes up, soybeans goes down. You're a farmer caught in between. You lose your farm. So this is what they have at the moment. So that's why they don't go even to the banks, even if they have the books, even if they have everything to show. The agricultural financing is very difficult. If you're in Philippines, the bank even they don't even speak to you. So if you're in Africa, so if you're in Kenya, the bank doesn't have a facility to fund you. So what we're competing with, I guess, if we were to go to Holland or Germany, yes, we'd be competing with a well-established financial system, and that's why we're not going there now. But if we go into the countries where that financial system doesn't yield itself to the farmers and those farmers are making the largest amount of crop, and they are not having that sort of availability of the funding.
And what are the risks investors should consider?
Well, there's a few risks that investors always should think about. It's blockchain, it's DeFi, there's regulatory uncertainty around. So we do have legal opinions about DEX tokens. We don't go into the countries or jurisdictions where these could be treated as something that would infringe the legislation. But the investors should always check whether they comply in terms of their ability to invest, and also they need to understand that it's still emerging tech. There are smart contract risks, of course, so we're getting audited by Quantstamp. There's going to be a second audit by Hacken probably. We're doing DeFi safety scoring, so we're quite aggressive in terms of trying to alleviate any any sort of concerns related to the security of the protocol. But that's, I think, certainly a consideration that investors should understand, that whatever they do, they should never invest more than they can tolerate to lose. And we always give that advice to everybody. And it's not a financial advice, by the way. Here we're not in a position to give the financial advice, rather than just to speak about the features about our protocol. But certainly the risks might be around things like all the farmers, suddenly decide that they're not going to pay us the crop share, and we have to litigate in 20 places at the same time. Our resources are stretched out, and the yield is not coming in, and that's where. So if we get basically gazumped by the farmers, then it's not going to be a pretty situation for the product. I mean, we still have the land, we still can litigate, but it may take a significant amount of time. Farmers are usually quite straightforward people, and if they understand the product, and if they get the right instruction and the right guidance, I think that problem can be alleviated. Of course, we should not be, disguising the fact that they have the obligation now in perpetuity to pay that crop share. And I think it's very important that they all understand that they sold their future harvest, or part of their future harvest, now permanently. We haven't really tried these contracts inside, all the legal systems, and we don't know how the courts will handle that, and how quickly we will have to be in court. I'm sure there's going to be a farmer that's not going to be wanting to pay the crop share, and we'd have to litigate that farmer, and we have to be sure that we're litigating successfully. So if we're litigating successfully, and this is one of the biggest, I guess, avenues for us to make sure that we have a very solid system. It's not imminent, because at the moment we have prepaid rentals for 12 months, and the security deposit for another 12 months. We're 24 months safe in terms of our runway with the yield payments to the investors. But the time goes very fast, and we have to make sure that we do build some serious legal muscle that is able to execute rapidly and swiftly on the farmers that are not meeting their crop share obligations, because that's a bread and butter of the protocol, to make sure that these payments are coming in regularly without any delay. That information will all be on chain, available for all the investors to see. What's our legal runway, how many farmers have defaulted on their payments, and for how long, how many kilograms they're paying, etc. So all that stuff is going to be all available on chain, and available for investors to see.
Yeah, I think this is the big risk when you have different countries, different laws, and when there's some, for example, in Poland, as I said, our law is really complicated. So if someone default here, and you will take him to the court and trying to get your money, get your corp, something like that, Jesus, it's gonna take years.
No, I understand that, and there's going to be probably limited exposures to in places like that for these very reasons, that we would assess the legal risks associated with our lien agreements, and then if these legal risks are very high, then we will not be in these jurisdictions where it's impossible to then litigate against these legal agreements. So look, I mean, every real world asset protocol has real world asset sort of challenges, and I think that's one of the beautiful things. You want to solve a problem, you're going to have a lot of other problems while you're solving your major problem. But we're quite optimistic that it makes sense. It makes economic sense. It makes sense for the farmers to be good. It doesn't make sense to for a farmer to try to circumvent the system for an obligation of 10%. I mean, he's going to go broke anyway, because the legal fees that he will have to mount and defend himself in courts and whatever, he's not going to be able to to productively operate. So there's not going to be probably much incentive for him to do that. And surely there's going to be probably over our, long-term, space, there probably going to be some odd cases where we would have to litigate and repossess the land and give it to, to somebody else to fulfill these obligations. But ultimately, um, it's not, we're over collateralizing significantly. So our crop share obligation is small relative to the value of the land. So that's why I think we have a lot of leeway there that that we can push this through.
So how big as a farmer, or how much harvest I need to produce every year to cooperate with you? Is there like a minimum
So if you're
amount?
a very small farm, well, okay. So firstly, you have to be growing historically one of the four major crops, right? So corn, wheat, rice, or soybeans. So you'd have to nominate your obligation in that commodity, and then it would make sense for a farmer that has at least 10 hectares to come on a platform, because his crop share obligation from that would be roughly around. So I can give you some rough numbers, right? So if he's got maybe 10 hectares, then he can get roughly probably between 30 and 70,000 US dollars advance payment for his crop share obligation of 400. So roughly, for his obligation to pay 400 kilograms of, let's say wheat, right? And wheat is now, let's say, 35 cents, so $140 per hectare that he would pay. So his annual obligation would be 1,400 US dollars, but denominated in wheat. So that obligation will change depending on whatever the wheat price is. So if the wheat price doubles next year, then he will pay 2,800, right? But I would say that anywhere from 10, I mean, our existing farmlands are probably the smallest block would be about 4 hectares, but they come in kind of lots. So we get a lot of from one investor farmer, then he's got probably 20 different properties, and the smallest would be 4, and the largest would be probably 100 hectares. It's how this land is being really delineated within the legal system, right? So there's a land cadastre, and whatever that land cadastre unit is, that would be the minimum amount. That's the correct answer here. So it's not about the area, it's about the legal unit of land measurement. So if you have a legal unit of land measurement of 1 hectare, then we can onboard 1 hectare.
Okay. Is there someone from community that want to jump in and ask a question? Now it's a good time. Maybe we have.
Absolutely.
Maybe we have someone or not. Depends.
Well, if not, guys, you can always jump on our server as well and ask a question. And we're also quite active on Twitter as well, so you can subscribe. And we're very open. I think that we like the questions. We like answering them. I think we like to be probed from different angles. And the more questions we have, from you guys, the more it gives us the confidence and understanding that we have the ability to address these questions. So without you guys and without you probing it from different directions, it's going to be probably not exactly the right sort of product. But when, for example, one of the things that have been changed due to the public sentiment and amount of questions that we had, the crop insurance part. So what if the farmer, what if the weather, what if the farmer cannot pay, what if there was a drought, what if there was a fire? And we reached out to several on-chain DeFi crop insurance platforms, and we're now in discussions to close out sort of a platform-wide insurance product, and that's what we exactly have done because of the questions that people are asking.
All right, that's great. So yeah, I think it's been a really good talk. I think we are at the end of it. Is there anything else you want to add to that, or we can finish this conversation?
Well, look, I mean, I can only add that we believe that that blockchain and the projects on blockchain that have been evolving over the past, let's say, 5-6 years, they go through cycles, and there was a cycle of the projects that were trying to bring real world stuff on chain, and most of them would be rug pulls and ICOs that have been building beer factories and harvesting harvesting or farming the in space, and some rubbish projects that were never meant to exist. What we see now is we see an emergence of real world use cases of blockchain, and that encourages us a lot. We've established, and we're one of the founding members of Real World Blockchain Association. So it's rwba.org, and that will be over time a good place to look for projects that are dealing with solving real world problems. And we're hoping to create a community of these projects that will be also sharing the knowledge between each other, and also building a shared community of investors and the participants, understanding that blockchain can be more than speculative, more than just pure speculation on the price of whatever asset, but also it can actually help solve real world challenges and real world problems. So for us, it's a big thing. We do invest a lot of effort and a lot of money into building that vision for blockchain, and also sort of delineating projects that are solving real world problems from projects that are not solving real world problems. And I think that the projects that do solve real world problems are the future of blockchain. And through these projects, the next billion people or 500 million people will be onboarded over the next 5-7 years into blockchain, and that's going to push the blockchain forward. So that's about it. Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot for having me, and really pleased to have this information disseminated in the community. And so again, guys, we're very open, so you can jump on our Discord, subscribe on Twitter to our feeds, and we're not big on Telegram, but we do have a channel there as well. So if you prefer that, then you can find us there as well.
Sure.
And
thank you.
Yeah, and also keep an eye on our public round, because maybe you'd be interested in putting a little bit of your funds into the governance token of the LandX platform. Again, it's going to be a pretty small round, so you need to keep an eye on it.
Thank you very much that you came here to this AMA, to a different community, and yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys what is in the future. What is your state?
Yeah, and let's stay in touch, and we'll reach out also to you and just let you know that there's going to be some Omega Pharma roles available for your folks as well. And I really thank you all for spending the time and taking it away from your business, family, or watching Netflix. It's always it's always humbling to know that people are actually wanting to hear about what you're building, and that's what really propels us to actually do stuff and to build every day. And hopefully we all succeed in that, and we certainly will not succeed without your support and help. So thanks a lot, guys, again.
Thanks. So have a good weekend, and bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye.